Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, I'm Susan, and I'm a college counselor and have read applications for a small liberal arts college and 2 research universities. My twins are recent college graduates.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of 2 daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at Keenan Flagler Business School, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. Good afternoon, friends. I have 2 words today for you, and those words are thank you. Last week I came on here and I shared a health scare with both Anitra and Joy, and I was just sharing this with you just to be a real authentic person, let you know things aren't always perfect for me. It just never dawned on me that so many listeners would send me texts and emails and well wishes. And I was really deeply moved. You know, this podcast is really special to me. And I call you all our listening family for a reason. It's just weird because I could be alone in an elevator with 99% of our listeners and I wouldn't recognize you. But yet I feel this mystic parasocial connection and bond that is very powerful. And I just want to let all of you know how much I appreciate each and every one of you. And then last week, I asked you to do us a favor to complete our new listener survey. It is our first one in 4 years, and 70 of you completed it since last Sunday. And virtually everyone completed the whole thing. And I can't put in words how helpful this is going to be for us to improve the podcast, reaffirm what you like that's working, and make some adjustments along the way. Also, how we'll be able to use it to secure some guest interviewers that you want to hear. Now, for our survey, we don't collect any emails or names. It's totally anonymous, and no question is required. But I've been reading the comments, and I promise you, whenever it's logistically possible, we will implement your suggestions, especially when we see things repeated over and over. You know, I was surprised how many people said they go on our website and listen to the entire interviews on our website. So those comments actually inspired me to move up to the top of my list, getting the most recent interviews up on the website. So if you go over to Your College Bound Kid right now, you can hear all 5 parts of the lawyer panel. We're only on part 3 today. You can hear all 5 parts of the Bob Massa interview. You can hear the Susan and I did, of which you'll hear part 3 today. You can hear all 5 parts of the Peg Keogh interview, the Chief Academic Officer at College Aid Pro. We've only run parts 1 and 2 so far. Parts 3, 4, and 5 will run the next 3 Thursdays. And if you want to hear all 4 parts of the Dr. Raymond Blakely interview of UT Austin, that's up there as well. That was just inspired by how many people said they like to listen on the website, the whole thing in its entirety. So that's just an example of how we are going to listen to you and implement your suggestions whenever possible. And if you haven't completed it, we'd be most grateful if you could help us out. Just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com, go to the resources tab, and it's the very first item in the dropdown. It's labeled Listener Survey. And someone reached out to me this week that said, I can't find it. And there was someone also on the survey that said, this survey was hard to find. So we've put it in the show notes for you. If that's easier for you, you'll see the link in the show notes, whichever one's easier for you. Burger King, have it your way. And friends, if you don't get YCBK Plus, we've got some really important college news articles. We'll be providing links to these articles that are not behind the paywall. The August episode will hit your mailbox the middle of this week. To sign up, just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. We only have 2 things under that tab. You'll see the Our Team, which, by the way, if you haven't read the backgrounds of our co-hosts, I think you might find that interesting. But the one underneath that just says YCBK Plus. Just hit the YCBK Plus button and sign up, and you'll start getting our monthly updates here for you. Friends, on today's episode, Susan and I continue our interview with one of the giants in the profession, Bob Massa. He started this work in 1974, and he's still helping families. After 45 years of admissions and enrollment management at 6 different schools, for the last 6 years, Bob has been the principal and co-founder of a company called Enrollment Intelligence Now. It's a leading consulting firm that helps admission offices and presidents just tapping into, what Bob and his partner have learned in their 50 plus years. And Bob bequeaths some of that wisdom to us in this interview. And honestly, friends, it's one of my favorite interviews I've done. And we've done, I think, 240 something now on the podcast. And when I was editing it, I just realized just how much wisdom Bob dispensed in the 100 minutes that we spent together. And then after that, I want to share with you my thoughts on the brand new first ever LinkedIn college rankings. I think I'm going to say something that might surprise you. Then you have to listen to that segment. We'll then close out with something really exciting, hearing from our students. We had Dan LaChance on from Rochester Institute of Technology, and I looked it up. He talked about RIT and cybersecurity. That was 18 months ago now. That's the last time we've had students on. So you'll hear from 5 students and 2 partners about what is it really like being an attorney. And even if your student is not planning on a career in law, I think we all can learn something from this panel discussion. So let's dive in with today's episode.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, Bob Massa is a giant in the profession with over 50 years of experience in admissions, enrollment management, and consulting to admission offices and presidents. Bob gives his wisdom for students about how to navigate the college admissions process, but we talk a lot about merit scholarships and college affordability in this segment, and he says some things about merit scholarships that might really challenge the conventional wisdom. Listen and enjoy. Bob, you mentioned financial pressures. It's something we talked about a lot here, and there's so many of them, right? Part of it's the war on college as well, and obviously what's happening to, you talked about it, birth dearth and enrollment cliff and federal government NIH cuts. It goes on and on and on and on. FAFSA fiasco, COVID, it just seems like it never stops. One question I know I'm getting a lot, I'm sure Susan is as well, in the counseling room is, how can I know if a college is financially sound?
Yeah.
And they're asking that about schools, that some of the wealthier schools, they'll ask it about, they'll read an article in Chicago or your old school, Johns Hopkins, 2,000 layoffs. I mean, they got hit really hard, right? With the NIH cuts. So how can a family know whether or not a school is financially stable? And how would you define financially stable? Because it seems like almost everybody's at least, freezing hiring. That doesn't necessarily mean you're not financially stable. What's your advice for parents hearing this or counselors?
Yeah, let me just preface this by saying that before January of this year, colleges were experiencing financial difficulties in major part because of the demographics and the price tag, the price of attendance, and the fact that there probably are more colleges and universities than there needs to be in the United States at this point for the demand. But then you throw in, Trump 2.0 and the incredible assault on higher education in all ways, whether it's using anti-Semitism as a leverage or calling efforts at inclusion and community as being illegal, taking research money away to punish universities. So it's I think it's much more difficult just a few short months after Christmas of this year.
I agree.
To tell if a university is really in trouble. And in Hopkins' case, for example, and I have some firsthand knowledge here, all of the 2,000 layoffs were all in ancillary departments, and one of my daughters was actually caught up in that because she worked for a center at Hopkins that focused on women's health issues, primarily in Africa.
Wow.
And it was 75% funded by USAID. And so she was one of the 2,000 that got laid off. Most of those 2,000 were people abroad who were working in these, humanitarian areas. that's not to say that there won't be other layoffs. I mean, Hopkins, for example, gets more federal research money than any university in the country.
By almost $1 billion from what I've seen. It's almost $1 billion
Considerably
more
more.
than number two.
Considerably more, and most of that is as a result of the applied physics laboratory and the research that they do. But but they get a lot of NIH money as well for all of the research that they do at the hospital and the medical school. And so today it's much more difficult. But in general, and by the way, I may be totally wrong on this, but I think this will all sort itself out. I mean, the bottom line is, and David Brooks just wrote a op-ed piece in the New York Times, and he said something. And I don't want to get political, but the title of the article was something about something like, Trump is winning the race to the bottom. And what he meant by that was that if you take money away from science research, and I'm not talking about research that doesn't correspond with this administration's values, like research on transgender medical needs or whatever. That's important stuff, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about basic medical research. I'm talking about scientific research that will help advance this country. And if you take that away, then we're really conceding to other countries our lead in those areas, right? So I think this will all sort itself out. I hope, but in general. So now I'm finally going to answer your question, Mark. In general, I think the most obvious way to figure out if a college is in financial trouble, and this sounds pedestrian, but it really is the most obvious way is to do a web search on the college in whatever in New York or in the Northeast or in California with financial challenges that have reduced or will reduce staff and programs in the last 2 years. I mean, something like that, because then you will find articles about that that you may have missed if you're not in that particular region. The next thing that they can do is to go on the college's website and look for either the institutional research office or the common data set, and look at first year and total enrollment trends and the financial aid offered over the past 4 years. And if you see rising financial aid and as a result, lower gross tuition revenue for the colleges, lower enrollments, increasing financial aid at rates that are way above inflation, you can be pretty sure that college is heading toward a financial crisis. I suppose you could, as a parent, you could write to or email the chief financial officer and asking him or her to explain what the college or university has been doing to protect itself from, the fate of other, mostly small colleges and universities who are closed that have closed. But if they don't respond directly, they'll typically ask staff, I think, to respond, and you'll undoubtedly, I think, get a positive spin, but also an acknowledgement from the school that it's concerned about these trends. I think those are ways for parents to find out if a college is really in financial hard times. Not so much the reduction in research money that has been thrown around now. I think that's going to resolve itself.
What about the elimination of degree programs at the bachelor's level?
I think if they're beginning to eliminate programs and staff, you're going to see that in the articles that, if they do a search, an SEO or a Google search, you will, but certainly that's an indication that there's financial concerns, financial difficulties. When you eliminate departments, you eliminate staff. And then you have to ask yourself, what departments are being eliminated? If they're eliminating, for example, foreign language departments, gosh, I think learning foreign language is pretty darn important skill to have
for every major.
in a global society.
Yeah.
So, I'd be concerned about that. But you can pick that up. A lot of these articles, whether they're in the popular press or whether they're in the trade press, will show up on a Google search, and that it sounds so obvious for me to say that, but that's really the best way for them to find out.
And of course, the school newspaper oftentimes will be running those articles as well.
Right, and they'll show up in the search as well.
Yeah, yeah. I want to get your opinion on something that was said to me in I did a big 26-day Texas trip recently, met with a bunch of schools and had a meeting with the VP of enrollment who was making the case that the days of schools saying we will not give any merit money other than the most strongest brand names in the country, those days are over. And they proceeded to talk about some pretty well-known schools who aren't meeting their class because they've stuck to this, we will not do merit, we're all need-based. And he's like, people are not paying $100,000 anymore for that, they're just not. And what are your thoughts on that?
Exactly what you said. I mean, I think that yeah, I'm going to say this, and your listeners will say, "Well, that guy is from a college or university perspective. He's talking about the colleges, not about us." I think colleges made a real tactical error going whole hog into the merit race because there's no end in sight, and once you do it, you can't back out of it. It's very difficult to back out of, even if you lower your price, which some institutions have done. And they, if 99% of the kids are getting, merit aid or need-based aid, you can lower your price because nobody's paying it anyway. But when you do that, parents and students still expect to get a discount, still expect to get their merit scholarship, even though, your price is, say, $20,000 lower than it was before. I think there are some schools that can survive and actually thrive without merit aid, but those are a handful, and everybody knows who they are. But just below that level, it's increasingly hard to do. Some schools are doing reasonably well that aren't at that level and that haven't, gotten too far into the merit game. But most schools, I'd be surprised if, particularly, and look, all of my experience has been with private colleges and universities. I've not been in the public sector at all. So that's where I'm coming from. But for me, if a private institution is offering both need-based aid and merit-based aid to over 90% of the students, and many of them are, then why should I pay full price?
Yeah.
Holy mackerel, am I that bad? I mean, why should I
Yeah.
pay full
What's
price?
wrong with my kid?
Yeah. So it's, I don't know where it's all going to end because I do have some experience in the short time that I was at Drew. Um, at the end of my career, we did do a tuition reset. We did lower the price by some $20,000. And I thought for sure, and we were aiding probably 95% of our students got money from the college at that point. And I wanted to bring it down to about 80% by lowering the price. I was not able to do that and still get the class because parents came back and said, we need $5,000 more, otherwise we're going somewhere else. And there is you do hold the cards a lot, and particularly in the less selective schools. You meaning the parents. Because schools don't want to lose the enrollment. On the other hand, systemically, it's really bad because I mean, think about it for a second. Colleges need money to operate, and if I'm an institution, if I'm a college or university, or if I'm in charge of a college or university as a president or chief enrollment officer or chief finance officer, I'm very committed to providing the resources, the educational resources that my students are going to need to be successful. But if I don't have the money to do that, I can't. So then, if you um, take this to its logical conclusion, everybody's going to be paying just a little amount, just a fraction of the price but they're getting much less for it because we can't afford at that price to provide what we were providing 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So it's really a lose-lose situation, even though parents think, and I don't blame them for thinking this because this is sort of the way we're all wired, that we're getting a deal because we're not paying full price. Actually, they're not getting the deal because they're getting a lot less over time. So anyway, those are my thoughts about it. You could argue those, but that's where I'm coming from.
Well, on our side as college counselors, the concept of affordability counseling has become so much more complicated with families, because that's part of what college counselors need to do is help families understand that they have to, unless they are extremely affluent and they're writing a check for the full cost of attendance and are not troubled by that, right? That we have to redefine what affordability means and how colleges can fit into different categories. Even the public university in one's home state may not be affordable because of the lack of need-based aid for those families in state.
Yeah, and let me be really clear that what I'm talking about here is what I would call non-need based
Right.
aid. You could call it merit scholarships, you could call it
Mhm.
discount, whatever you want. In terms of need-based aid, I think we need to go all out there. I mean, if parents can't afford it legitimately, and I'll define that in a second, then I think it's our responsibility to be there and make it possible for the student to attend. Years ago, we would say things like, the primary responsibility for financing a child's education rests with the parents, not with the school. But when the parents were the federal government, but when the parents can't afford it, then we're here for you. But what's happened over time, and again, this isn't a criticism of millennial parents or older Gen X parents, whatever, is that um, take higher education out of it for a second. What we need to spend as a family has really risen, right? It's not what we need to spend as a family, it's what we want to spend as a family. And so, education doesn't necessarily rise to the top, especially now because, there's so much merit money out there that my kid can get. So, I'll spend money on other things, but I won't spend money on college. And again, I'm not trying to be critical of families because this is, just to give you an example, I grew up in a small house in a suburb of New York City that had 3 bedrooms and 1 bath, and it was a ranch house. And I had a sister and 2 parents, and we had 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, tiny little kitchen. Um, Today and I lived in that house for until I graduated from college. um, Today starter homes aren't even that. I mean, everyone is open concept and master bath and so what we consider a need
Uh-huh.
uh, today wasn't even in our dreams, 50 years ago, or 70 years ago. So again, I think it's important to recognize that as a family, as the head of my family, I had the responsibility to educate my kids,
Mm-hmm.
and and a vacation in Turks and Caicos wouldn't even be part of the equation, because I had to pay for my kids.
Bob, another question we get frequently from parents who are not going to qualify for need-based aid at a private school, but the thought of paying full sticker is either a non-starter or something that totally is going to stretch them outside of their budget. But they like the school a lot. And so they say, if I check the box that says, I'm interested in need-based aid and it's a need-aware school, is it putting me at a disadvantage? Can you answer
Yeah.
that and talk about how need-aware works, at least, different places you've worked with and what would you say to, how would you respond to those parents? It's a pretty frequent question we get in the counseling room and we get sent into the podcast.
So, if you need financial aid, and even though you might not qualify for it, if you need financial aid and you're not going to be able to attend the school without it, if you don't check the box and you get in, you're not going to be able to go anyway.
Right.
So, I really think, I come down on the side of being honest. The colleges have to be honest to students and parents, and students and parents need to be honest with the college. So if you need aid, check the box. Schools that are need aware, at what used to be the margin. Now, I've been out of campus-based work now for 6 years. So, but what used to be the margin was, say that, I don't know, bottom 10% or so of the students who are admissible. If I'm at a need-aware school, and there's someone who's kind of what we would call on the bubble, maybe we'd accept them, maybe we wouldn't, depending on the day. It's not a super strong candidate, can do the work, not highly competitive. If that student were a full pay student, maybe we'd take that person. If the student needs, 3/4 of tuition, room and board, maybe we wouldn't take the student because they're not that strong. But if the student is really strong, it doesn't make any difference whether they need the full boat or they can pay for us 5 times over. If it's a strong student, very highly competitive student, most need-aware schools, in my experience, would admit that student and not deny or waitlist the student because of their desire for financial aid.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Well, and truthfully, and I say this many times, it's not checking the box. Decisions do not rest on checking a box. The teenagers are the ones filling out the Common App, right?
Right.
In my experience, and this was a while ago when I was, in liberal arts college admission, half the families where the box was checked on the Common App, yes, we will be submitting the FAFSA, never did. Because those applications were filled out, first of all, by the kids, but also well in advance of some parents' decision about that. And we never held the box checking against anybody. It was when the FAFSA and the CSS profile came in and the family's ability to pay was determined. Then if we were, and Bob, I'm sure you would agree with this, that if we were over budget with what could go out in terms of financial aid awards, that's when you would look at students who were in that gray area. They were slated for admission, but they were in the gray area, meaning, maybe half the kids with those academic and personal ratings were going to get in and half weren't. That's when students with a certain level of financial need, and every year in admissions, we would be told how much money in a way we had to recoup in order to go out in anticipation of a balanced financial aid budget. Right. And at that point, then by geographic territory, as territory managers, we would go in and look at the level of need and the ratings on the application and bring some students forward to move to a different category.
Yeah.
Colleges that gap wholesale are just going out with letters of admission and underfunding or not funding those kids, which creates a whole nother scenario.
Well, it does. And what happens there, of course, is that, you tease the student by offering admission and, they're never going to be able to afford it, or they afford it and then they're an attrition statistic early on. And, we were talking a little earlier about admit rates and yield. When you do that, your admit rate goes up and your yield goes down.
That's right. So it's not worth it in the long run.
For both the college and the student, it's not worth it.
Well, and to set a family up for excessive borrowing, excessive debt, I think is one of the worst things that we as educators can do.
Yeah, and of course now with this new bill that has gone through, I don't want to call it by name,
I know.
parents are going to be capped at the amount that they can borrow at 65,000 per student. And that might sound like a lot, but in the past, parents could borrow up to the full
Full
cost
cost of
education
attendance. Right.
minus any financial aid. For each of 4 or actually 5 years, I think. So the 65,000 is really putting a cap on it, and will force students either to go to a less expensive alternative, which is okay, or to go out into the private market and borrow. And
That was my question, Bob. That's the plus loan cap, right? But private borrowing can be in addition to that.
Sure.
Shouldn't be. Let's not encourage that.
Sure.
But
Sure. It's up to the individual. Friends, this concludes this segment of my interview with Susan with Bob Massa, but he's back next week, so I hope you'll join us. Friends, I'm going to say something if you're a longtime listener of our podcast, and it's probably going to shock you. So LinkedIn just joined the rankings crowd and released their first ever college rankings. And guess what? I love it. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Stuck, I thought you hated rankings. I thought you've told us over and over that just like we don't rank churches, because we respect the fact that one person wants to worship in a more solemn, quiet, and reflective way. Another person wants to be very vocal and demonstrative. In that same way, you can't rank colleges. I thought you taught us that picking a college is like selecting a custom pair of shoes that fits your foot, and no one else can tell you which pair of shoes is best going to fit your foot. You need to put the shoes on yourself, and only you can decide what's the best fit for you. So why the heck would you think another set of brand new rankings is good? Now, if you're a regular listener, you know I frequently talk about when I wrote my book in 2017, I picked my 10 favorite admissions quotes. I oftentimes read them to you, and I included them at the start of the book. Well, I'm going to read the one quote that I picked that had to do with the rankings, and it's by Lloyd Thacker, the founder of Educational Conservancy, another giant in the profession who'd be another great person to have on, kind of in the Bob Massa mold to interview. In fact, I remember one time Susan said, Mark, do you want to hop in the car? Let's drive all the way to Baltimore. We can hear Lloyd Thacker, which was like a 2-hour drive. That's how much it's worth hearing Lloyd. Anyway, here's what Lloyd said. The commercialization of college admissions has created a crisis by undermining educational values. And the commercialization has been led by the ranksters, the rankings. The rankings imply a degree of precision and authority that simply is not supported by educational data. Their influence on education in this country has grown way beyond any educational jurisdiction. They have dictated the way education is perceived and pursued. Well, so how do I reconcile that? How can I say all these things and then be happy that LinkedIn's out with new rankings? About 15 years ago, I realized I can upgrade the rankings until I'm black and blue in the face, but they aren't going anywhere. When U.S. News releases their college rankings, their sales are up over 40% for that week, and 11 million people read that issue, so they're not going away. However, the best way to convince people that Thacker was correct when he said the rankings imply a degree of precision and authority that simply is not supported by educational data is to have the rankings be all over the place. In fact, I did this in my book. I showed how in one ranking, Wesleyan in Connecticut was in the top 20, and another was in the 300s, depending on which ranking service applied their own formula. Well, LinkedIn particularly appealed to me because I think they have potential to put a real dent in the power U.S. News has. It is amazing how often people who have a lot of respect for just quote U.S. News rankings as if they're gospel. Now, like the Forbes ranking, LinkedIn uses a lot of focus on career services and their primary metric in their ranking. They have their 5 different criteria that they use, that they apply to their rankings. And all of them really have to do with just success in the job market. And that's one reason why I think there's potential for them to resonate, because people want that right now. So some of their key metrics are job placement within a year of graduation, internship participation rates, alumni who go on to become entrepreneurs and reach the C-suite roles, alumni network strength, connections between grads and students, and knowledge breadth, diversity of skills and fields. So they have access to hundreds of millions of profiles. So this is not survey-based, but it's based on a voluminous amount of data. Now, it's still subjective. I'm not trying to pretend that there's a patina of accuracy here in these rankings. It's highly subjective. But I like that they didn't follow the crowd. They weren't survey based. And, I've been, it's been written from some former people that have been involved in U.S. News rankings who have said that when they tweak a formula, if schools that the public wouldn't think show up at the top, they change the rankings because they think, the public won't believe that. So they go back to the laboratory. I like the fact that they didn't do this here. They have some schools way up that other people don't have. And I like that because it reinforces the subjectivity of this. It reinforces it's about you coming up with your rankings. To me, it discredits the rankings because they're all over the place. And so I like that. So if you take a look at some of their rankings and how much they differ from U.S. News in some places, it's really rather significant. And I absolutely think it's amazing. Probably the one that was the big headline grabber was Babson 7th in the country. It's not even close to that. It was, in U.S. News. WPI ranks way higher here than it does with U.S. News. In fact, almost 50 spots higher. Miami University in Ohio, where Hillary went, 35th, way higher than in U.S. News, where it's like 136. And many, many others. Fairfield, Bentley, Wake Forest, Villanova, Richmond, SMU, all schools way ranked higher here. And I think it reinforces the point that this stuff is formula-driven, it's subjective, if the rankings are all over the place, maybe I don't need to put that much confidence in them, and maybe I need to create my own rankings. So that's why I'm celebrating them. All right, let's transition to our student lawyer panel.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, we continue with three aspiring lawyers who are rising seniors, Jack from New York, Martina from Pennsylvania, Sonia from North Carolina, asking questions to our two law school partners, John from New Jersey, who's a partner in a big law firm, Jeff from Seattle, who started his own public law firm. The three rising seniors are joined by Eileen, a college junior who is in California, and Satchel, who is about to start his second year at Boston University in law school. Sonia, go ahead, Sonia.
What's the worst part about your job?
That's a good question.
You want me to go first, Jeff? You want to go? Who's going? I'll go first.
Go ahead.
Sure. I'm going to take the easy way out of first and saying keeping track of my time. When you are a lawyer at a firm like mine, we produce widgets, business term. The widgets we produce are 0.6 of an hour. They are hours that represent the work we have done. The way you make money is by billing your time and collecting on that time, which means you have to keep track of your time. It is the bane of, to my knowledge, every single lawyer's existence to the extent that they have to do that. The other piece I'll add beyond that, because that's somewhat of a cop-out answer for anybody that has to bill time. It's a cop-out answer, at least. The other piece is there are just some administrative tasks and organizational tasks that just aren't fit for my personality type. I'd much rather be out there talking with clients and talking strategy and deals, or finding new opportunities to work with new clients, or figuring out solutions to really hard problems, than I would be doing paperwork or doing engagement letters or things like that. And those things are incredibly important to the business of law, even if they are not directly outwardly important to practicing itself.
Thank you. Jeff, go ahead.
So I love the kind of law that I practice, representing cities, but because I represent cities, I at least in my own little city world, I am a public figure, and I'm not an elected official, but I am often treated as one, and you can understand probably what that means in terms of the kinds of flack that elected officials get these days. People are always looking to blame government officials about one thing or another, and oftentimes the city attorney is the target of that. And unlike the politicians who can have a press conference and defend themselves because of the rules of professional conduct, I'm not able to do that. I can't have a press conference and explain why the thing that they're upset about wasn't my fault. And so that's probably the thing I like least about being a lawyer.
Jeff, I want to hop onto that because Sonia, I actually had this conversation with a client recently. It was two lawyers who were in-house at a client of the firm's, and they are in a consumer facing industry. A lot of the work that I do is in the receivable space. So dealing with buying, selling, financing, mortgage loans, student loans, business loans, other receivables. And these two lawyers were telling me about how they basically had to pull everything that they could off of the internet about themselves. They couldn't be on LinkedIn. They couldn't be on Facebook. I mean, I'm not on Facebook either, but they just had to the extent possible, get their name out of any public sphere because consumers would hunt them down. In some cases, it was, hey, can you help me? But in some cases, it was a lot less nice than that. And that's a piece of the world that I think most folks don't have any understanding or appreciation for when you're 18, 20, 22. You go in house, if you're doing something like that, you can become a point of contact when you don't expect to ever be a point of contact, and for some really not nice stuff.
Eileen, and then Satchel.
Okay. What kind of skills or personal skills, Jonathan and Jeff, would you say were beneficial to you in becoming a lawyer?
I think it's sort of like Jonathan was saying. I have, I think, a good, like, sort of naturally a good mind for the type of thinking that you need to do as a lawyer. I don't know that I have any particular magic skills. I mean, I think honestly in my case, probably it was just belief in myself, because not everyone decides to start their own firm. And that takes a certain amount of confidence that you can survive on your own and that you can get clients on your own and that you're not going to have someone else feeding you work. And just having that level of self-belief is largely what got me to where I am today.
And I think a lot of lawyers who lead teams or lead firms have to have that, right? My team, their livelihood, their ability to pay their mortgage is dependent upon me. And for a lot of folks, that's probably an incredibly scary, scary thought. To me, that's exciting because it means there's a tremendous amount of opportunity and a wonderful opportunity to grow something really unique in the way that I want to grow it. In terms of at a junior level, which is obviously very, very, very different, right? Nobody should be thinking about business development when they're 21 years old. Just focus on learning the skills of being a lawyer, persistence, thick skin. So while I'm not on social media, I do kind of play around in TikTok once in a while. I'm on Big Law Talk of late. And so aside from the silly biting summer associate, which I know Satchel is very well aware of because he's laughing maniacally right now, you see a lot of these junior associates who are on there talking about growing a thick skin. Lawyers can sometimes be adversarial. I know that may sound shocking to those of you listening, but they can be. And you've got to learn to roll with the punches. That's not always an easy thing to do, but it's really important because it doesn't matter what kind of law you're practicing. You're probably going to come across some personality types that you don't love. And so find ways for those things to not matter that much. That doesn't mean you don't grow and learn from the experience, but you have to learn it's business and not personal and figure out what positive you can take out of it and how to apply that rather than dwelling on the negative or letting it feed anxiety or something along those lines, because that will not be helpful for you.
Satchel.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question for the students, especially because like going through 1L was a very stressful time, very anxious, anxiety producing time. So I kind of wanted to know what everybody was anxious about or kind of stressed about going into the admission cycle in general. I know you guys are all in different places, but I kind of just wanted to know what in general has kind of been the most stressful part about it so far.
So that would be Martina, Sonia, and Jackson, all three rising seniors. Eileen, you're good on that. You've already been through it.
Okay, so I'll go first. So for me, I think this year, this year, like junior year was, as you all know, it's infamous for being super duper stressful. The stressful part of junior year was probably like trying to get good grades and also like not only having good grades, but then like also maintaining my extracurriculars and my job and like all the different stuff that I do, while also, like I'm a human being, so like I like to talk a lot and like I have a lot of friends, also hanging out with friends as well. So I think like maintaining that balance was like the most like kind of like stressful part for me, like the hardest part to do this year. But good thing I did end up well with very good grades this year. Junior year didn't kill my GPA, so that's good. And I did manage to find like a nice balance between like all the different areas of my life.
Yeah,
That's it, Sonia? Go ahead.
I definitely agree. Time management and just like management in general was a big issue for me this year. It wasn't even just that, though. It was what I decided to put my energy into, what I decided to care about. I sort of had to pick and choose between things I had done in the past. Like I had to drop rock climbing, for instance, in favor of boosting my GPA. So it was making sacrifices when necessary for the admissions office, and then just like making sure that I had a good work-life balance so that I didn't burn out instantly. Because there was a time during the year when I was very close to doing that, taking multiple APs, taking multiple extracurriculars every single day. It just got to a point, and so I had to sort of step back from a few things and then continue on.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say definitely balancing extracurriculars and also just like the pressures of knowing what you want to do, like knowing what you want to do in the future. I mean, I'm still facing it right now. It's like a big question in my mind, like if like law school is for me and like if my reasons are valid enough. I feel like that's what a lot of people my age are thinking about.
Hey, Sonia, I still don't know what I want to do. That's okay. You shouldn't know what you want to do. You're 17, 18 years old.
Yeah, it took 5 years to figure it out.
There you go. Yeah, you drove the cab. Got a chance to think on that philosophy. So I have a couple questions that maybe John could take one and maybe Jeff takes another. So when I was at Westtown School, I used to do this big career fair. We'd have like a room for the dentists and a room for the doctors and the lawyers and insurance people and entrepreneurs. And then we'd bring students in and they ask questions. One of the answers the lawyers would consistently give is, if you want to be a good lawyer, become a good writer because you're going to write a lot. So that's question one. I want to see if our lawyers agree with that. Second question, totally different. When I was at KIPP, I took a trip with students to Alabama to do the whole civil rights thing, and we met with a judge afterward. And the judge said, I have the greatest job because my job consists of 4 things. He said, I think, I write, I speak, and I read. I think, I write, I speak, and I read. And that's what I get to do all day, and I love it. So, this is a while ago, that read all the thing time. I'm taking you back almost 20 years. Truth to the you're going to write a lot, so become a good writer. And what do you think about the judge saying, I think, I write, I speak, and I read?
Yeah, I think those are pretty accurate. I think, these days you have to really distinguish between, what is good writing, and especially with generative AI, anyone can spit out 10 pages of something, but, does it make any sense? I almost feel like the thinking is going to be more important than the writing part, because the writing in some ways is going to happen with AI, but you need to then be able to understand whether what the AI has generated makes any sense, and whether can you poke holes in what the AI has generated. And it's the critical thinking, I think, that's just going to not go away as being the most important piece.
Yeah, and there's overlap there, because Janet Rapley of Princeton used to always say, she was over that office, how you write is a reflection of how you think, and what you think matters to us. So that's kind of another way of saying it. But you're going to add something, John?
Yeah, I mean, I would completely agree with that. To me, writing is the output of the ability to effectively communicate ideas, whether those ideas are persuasive, whether those ideas are not intended to be persuasive. Kind of put that aside. I do not do a ton of writing. I don't, frankly, do a ton of traditional reading. I'm not reading cases. I'm not reading statutes. When I'm reading at this point in time, it's either reading agreements, which are not normal English by any stretch, and no amount of traditional reading and writing really is on point there. And law school doesn't teach you in any meaningful way, I don't think. Still, it certainly didn't back in the day, how to read a contract. It's much more about figuring out the puzzle pieces and then being able to explain a 1,000-piece, really difficult to understand puzzle in words that folks who don't deal with puzzles on a daily basis can understand. What one way I like to explain that is I work closely in some cases with CFOs or comptrollers or accountants. They speak a completely different world than the world lawyers speak. And the two of us speak completely different worlds than the worlds that the CEO, if the CEO is not a lawyer or an accountant, would speak. And you've got to have the ability to connect to the lawyer, to the accountant, and to whomever that business person is. And so whether that's writing, whether that's verbally, regardless of the method of communication, the ability, to Jeff's point, to think concisely, think in a way that can effectuate the goals you're seeking to effectuate by being able to communicate those ideas is incredibly, incredibly important. I have no doubt, by the way, judges write a ton, right? That's certainly the case. And there's some lawyers who write a ton. My world, I don't write a ton. And frankly, I'm happy for that. I'm not interested in, I don't have the ability anymore, I think, to sit and kind of write at length.
Mark, I want to offer some advice that might not fit into a question that you're going to ask, if I
Sure.
can do that
Yeah, do
before
it.
we stop. I was given this advice when I was trying to decide which law school to go to, and it stuck with me, and I think it's still largely true to this day. Although I'm curious to hear what John has to say about it. The advice that I got into two law schools. I got into Boston University and Seattle University, and and Boston University. It was very tempting. It's it'd be fun to be on the East Coast, etc. The advice that I was given was figure out where you want to live. Figure out where you want to live first. And if you get into a top 10 school or something like that, and no shade to Boston University, excellent school, right? But generally not considered to be a top 10 school. If you get into a top 10 school, this probably doesn't matter because you can live anywhere. But if you don't get into a top 10 school, make sure that you choose a school that is located where you want to live, because you will have lots of opportunities, even if that school is down in the 3-digit range. You will have lots of opportunities in that location where the school is, particularly if you do well in law school.
So, Jeff, I completely agree with you. I was in a very different situation, obviously, than you. And going to NYU Law, it was number 4 in the country when I went and has dropped down to 8 or 10 since then. And that's clearly my fault. I take full responsibility for any NYU Law grads for having dropped down there. But that is absolutely the case. I'd also add the economic component to it as well, particularly in a rapidly changing environment with the availability of loans potentially, which is if you're striving for big law, and you should have a good reason to strive for that, then it makes sense to be aiming for the T14. But if you're not striving for big law, then you should be incredibly thoughtful about both the location and the cost. There is no need to saddle yourself with $250,000 worth of debt or more when you want to hang a shingle, when there are going to be schools that will offer you just as good training in the areas that you want to be in for a half or a third or a tenth or zero cost other than the opportunity cost of going by way of scholarships. Be very thoughtful about what your end goal is when you're thinking about where you start.
And that applies to other things. Lisa from the podcast gave that advice to my daughter, Joy, for her master's program. And Joy was already thinking that way, so it was a confirmation. She picked NC State because she wanted to be in the research triangle. And there were 28 people in her cohort, and do you know 27 of them live in the triangle right now, and one's in D.C.? 27 of 28 live in the triangle.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, it matters in a lot of ways.
Okay, who's up? Is it Martina?
Yes, I believe it's me. So I have one question, but it's directed to Mr. Jonathan. So I remember, I hope this is correct, but you said something along the lines that you studied like international business in your undergraduate. So as I said before, I want to do IR, international relations, but I'm also looking at international business. It looks interesting, and like I've read about it. Do you think that helped you in law school? And if so, why or why not?
So I don't know that international business in particular helped me in law school. I will say what it did help me do was get a greater appreciation for the diversity of thought and approaches to the world. That certainly helped. I will say, as a general matter, and while I'm not going to suggest a finance degree is the right degree for everyone because it clearly isn't, I do think that taking classes in the business world, from finance to organizational behavior to marketing, really did help and does help in my daily life. To accounting, I took, I think, 3 semesters of accounting, including managerial or cost accounting, which is the absolute worst class I ever took in my life. For those accountants out there, Jeff is laughing right now, but for those accountants out there, they probably know what I'm talking about. And the ability to understand clients' needs in light of what I do for a living, which is ultimately the legal side of financial engineering, which is a lot of what structured finance is, and risk assessment and understanding. A lot of lawyers see risk and they yell and scream and run away because as a lawyer, you're trained to identify risk, but risk is not just a thing. Risk is what's the likelihood of something happening, but like what's the also the consequences of that thing happening, and how do I bring those two together? Risk is frequency times severity, to understand the context. And so the ability to frame that within the lens of business acumen, likewise learning how to read financial statements and being comfortable around them, those kind of things, while they weren't international business, they were business related. But again, I pursued those because those were of interest to me, not because I felt some duty, because that would be the, in quotes, right thing to do by any stretch. I mean, the philosophy major is probably a far better major, honestly, for a law student than what I did.
Friends, this concludes this part of our panel of students asking questions to partners at law firms. Hope you'll join us next week for the next segment. On Thursday's episode, Vince and I are discussing another hot topic in the news, and then Linda and Lisa will answer a question from a listener. Peg Keogh continues giving tips for correctly filling out the FAFSA in the profile in part 3 of 5, and Dr. Raymond Blakely helps us understand University of Texas at Austin in part 2 of 4. Friends, it's reported that someone once approached arguably America's foremost inventor, Thomas Edison, and said to him, "Thomas Edison, how did you become such a genius?" To which Edison ostensibly replied, "Genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration." Did you catch that? There's no substitute for hard work, friends. See you on Thursday. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about your college-bound kid on your social media feed. And you can help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating on the yourcollegeboundkid.com website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. And if you have a question or a recommendation, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak. We will do our best to get your question in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I am the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admissions and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-hosts, Dr. Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Esquivel in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, New London, Connecticut, Hillary Dickman, an Admission Officer at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and our international admissions expert, Kevin Newton in Dallas, Texas. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs from Kimberly Bloss. Our reliable webmaster is Stylionis Dimitru. Website updates are done by Joyce Stucker. Our image editor is Vlad Honchar. If you want to have a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly YCBK newsletter, YCBK Plus, it is also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights, our blog, and our upcoming events. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.